The morning sun spilled lazily over Umuahia, turning zinc rooftops into mirrors of light. The town was already alive. Kiki riders honked impatiently at the junction, women spread yams and tomatoes on raffia mats at the roadside, and the chatter of school children filled the air like restless birds. In the middle of all this stood the Okri compound, a tall duplex painted cream and trimmed with maroon. It was one of the houses you noticed immediately when you passed, not just because of its size but because everything about it spoke of prosperity. Inside, Adana Okri was sipping her tea. She was a woman people noticed, tall, with skin the color of roasted groundnut and a kind of beauty that wasn't loud but steady, like the calm after rain. She dressed with effortless elegance, even when she was only at home. Her husband, Okri, a well-known trader who had built his wealth importing spare parts from Lagos to the southeast, adored her. He often said she was the pillar of his life, and he didn't care who heard it. Adana smiled as she looked at her phone, scrolling through pictures from last night's women's meeting. Her friends had commented endlessly on her girly and lace wrapper. Compliments weren't new to her, but she received them graciously. She barely noticed Ngozi, the maid, who moved silently across the living room with a tray of sliced pawpaw. Ngozi was 22, from a small village outside Umuahia. She had come to work for the Okris 2 years earlier, after her uncle persuaded her mother that it would be good for her to learn town ways. She had adjusted quickly, learning the household routines, handling errands, and keeping the house spotless. She was efficient, obedient, and quiet. To most people, she was invisible, just the house girl. But she saw everything. She noticed the clothes Adana wore, the perfumes that lingered in her room, the soft way Okri laughed when his wife teased him, and the way neighbors always greeted her with respect. At first, Ngozi admired her mistress. But admiration, when fed too often without satisfaction, can sour into envy. Every day, as she polished the marble tires or washed the Lexus Jeep, Ngozi felt a gnawing ache in her stomach. Why was Adana, who was only 10 years older than her, living like a queen while she bent her back like a servant? Why did Okori smile so widely at Adana, never noticing the quiet diligence of the girl who made his meals and ironed his clothes? She told herself she wasn't jealous. She told herself she was grateful. But every time she overheard visitors praising Adana's grace or Okori's devotion to his wife, something twisted tighter in her chest. One evening, as Ngozi carried plates back from the dining table, she caught the tail end of Okori telling Adana, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Without you, I'd be nothing." The words lodged in Ngozi's ears like a thorn. That night, she lay on her narrow bed in the small servants' quarters behind the house, staring at the ceiling fan. The words replayed, mocking her. She imagined what it would feel like to be the one Okori spoke to like that. She imagined sitting where Adana sat, wearing her wrappers, her jewelry, her perfumes. The thought frightened her, but it also thrilled her. The following weeks only deepened her obsession. At church on Sunday, Adana drew attention effortlessly, her smile, her poise, the way even the priest made a point to greet her. In the salon, women whispered that she had a charm, that she was blessed beyond measure. Ngozi overheard them, her fist tightening around the bag of groceries she carried. By the time Christmas approached, her admiration had turned into a hunger she could no longer ignore. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, a small pharmaceutical shop opened along their street. The owner, a man in his 30s named Kolu, was friendly, always ready to chat with passers-by. Ngozi found excuses to stop there after errands, buying paracetamol one day, cough syrup another. Kolu liked to talk, and he didn't notice how carefully Ngozi listened when he explained which drugs were strong or which could knock someone out if taken wrongly. Ngozi laughed and pretended it was just idle curiosity. Inside, something dangerous was beginning to bloom. Meanwhile, in the Okori household, life remained smooth. Okori's business thrived, and Adana prepared for her birthday celebration, a small party with family and close friends. She asked Ngozi to help with decorations and food, trusting her completely. But trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered. Ngozi watched Adana's preparations with a forced smile. She helped select the lace gown, arrange the drinks in the fridge, and even ironed the birthday sash that read Adana at 32. But every ribbon tied, every plate set, only reminded her that she was on the outside, looking in. When she lay in bed that night, the ceiling fan spinning above, Ngozi whispered to herself, "Why not me?" The whispers of envy had grown into a voice. And soon, that voice would demand action. The night of Adana's birthday arrived with laughter and music. Strings of fairy lights twinkled along the fence wall, and the sound of high-life music drifted from rented speakers. Friends filled the Okori compound, women in sequined blouses, men in starched senator suits, children chasing each other with balloons. The smell of jollof rice and grilled chicken lingered in the air, and bottles of malt and beer clinked as guests toasted to Adana's good health. Ngozi moved quietly among them, balancing trays, refilling drinks, adjusting decorations when they slipped. No one paid her much attention, except to hand her empty cups. But she was watching. Always watching. From her corner, she saw how Okori beamed whenever his wife laughed. She saw the way men looked at Adana with admiration and women with envy. And when the priest, invited as a family friend, raised a prayer for many more years of life, Ngozi's lips tightened. Many more years. The words cut her like a knife. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the compound lay in silence, Adana rested on the couch, tired but happy. "Ngozi, you worked hard today," she said kindly. "Take some food and rest." "Thank you, Ma," Ngozi replied, lowering her eyes. But inside, she seethed. Adana's kindness felt like pity. She didn't want her leftovers, she wanted her life. In the weeks that followed, Ngozi's jealousy hardened into resolve. She began experimenting in small ways, pushing boundaries without being noticed. She would oversalt Adana's soup, misplace her jewelry, or forget to pack items for meetings. Each time, Adana scolded gently, never suspecting malice. But Okori noticed. He frowned whenever Adana raised her voice, and he would murmur, "She's just a girl, be patient." Gradually, Ngozi realized something. While Adana's complaints made her look harsh, Ngozi's quiet humility earned Okori's sympathy. That discovery was like fire to dry wood. One evening, as Ngozi swept the compound, Okori called her over. "Ngozi, you've been loyal in this house. I appreciate it." She lowered her eyes, hiding the thrill in her chest. "Thank you, sir. I only do my duty." Okori nodded and returned inside. But the seed had been planted. In that moment, Ngozi stopped being just a servant in her own mind. She became a contender. The plan took shape slowly. Her visits to Kolu, the pharmacist, grew more deliberate. She asked questions in a joking manner. What medicine could make someone sleep deeply? What could upset the stomach? Kolu, thinking she was simply curious, explained freely. He mentioned one drug that, if taken in excess, could cause organ failure. Ngozi stored the information like treasure. She never bought too much at once, never raised suspicion. Instead, she collected small packets here and there, keeping them hidden in a nylon bag under her bed. At night, she imagined different scenarios. A poisoned stew. A laced bottle of malt. A tea spiked with powder. Each vision ended the same way, Adana weak, helpless, fading. And in the shadows, Ngozi rising. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. Adana fell ill one rainy afternoon. It was nothing serious, just fatigue from running errands in the wet weather, but she asked Ngozi to prepare tea with honey. Ngozi obeyed, but her hands trembled as she opened the cupboard where she had hidden her stash. She pulled out a small white sachet. Her breath quickened. But she hesitated. This was no longer fantasy, this was real. If she did it, there would be no turning back. A clap of thunder broke her indecision. She tore the sachet open and sprinkled a pinch into the steaming cup, stirring until it dissolved. Carrying the tray into the sitting room, her knees felt weak. "Your tea, Ma," she said softly. Adana smiled gratefully, sipping slowly as the rain drummed against the windows. Ngozi stood there, heart pounding, expecting something dramatic, choking, gasping, collapsing. But nothing happened. Adana simply drank, sighed, and leaned back. For a moment, Ngozi panicked. Had she been caught? But Adana only murmured, "Thank you," and closed her eyes to rest. Ngozi retreated to the kitchen, shaking. She had done it. The line had been crossed. The next day, Adana complained of dizziness and nausea. She thought it was malaria. Okori rushed her to a private clinic, where doctors ran tests and prescribed injections. She grew weaker over the next week, unable to keep food down. Okori was distraught, pacing the hospital corridors, calling doctors in Lagos for advice. Friends visited, offering prayers and gifts. Through it all, Ngozi was the picture of devotion. She stayed by Adana's bedside, adjusting pillows, massaging her feet, spoon-feeding her watery pap. Nurses whispered admiration for the faithful house girl. But inside, Ngozi felt victorious. Each cough, each groan, was proof of her power. One evening, Okori sat beside his wife's bed, tears in his eyes. "Adana, please fight. Don't leave me." Ngozi watched from the corner, her face a mask of sorrow. In her heart, she whispered, "Leave him. Leave him for me." The illness dragged on for weeks. Doctors were baffled. Tests showed nothing unusual, yet Adana's health deteriorated. She grew thin, her once radiant skin pale and dry. Visitors left in whispers, shaking their heads. Okori clung to hope, but shadows of despair crept into his eyes. And through it all, Ngozi remained, silent, dutiful, invisible. But in the silence of her small room, she allowed herself a smile. The plan was working. Adana's decline was slow but steady. By the second month of her illness, she could no longer stand on her own. Her voice grew faint, and even her laughter, once bright as a bell, sounded like dry leaves scraping the ground. Doctors spoke in careful tones, offering new prescriptions, recommending referrals. But nothing worked. Okori became a shadow of himself. The once energetic businessman who strode confidently through markets now moved with stooped shoulders. His shop suffered, his customers complained, but he hardly cared. All that mattered was saving his wife. Ngozi, however, was tireless. She was the one who woke at dawn to sponge Adana's fevered body, who coaxed her to swallow medicines, who kept the house running when everyone else faltered. Neighbors praised her loyalty. Even relatives nodded approvingly, whispering that God blesses those who serve with humility. But behind her bowed head, behind her whispered "yes, sir," and "yes, more," burned a hunger she could no longer contain. Each passing day felt like a step closer to victory. One rainy evening, Adana slipped into unconsciousness. The wailing began almost immediately, nurses rushing, relatives crying, Okori shouting prayers into the sterile air of the hospital ward. But the machine stopped beeping, and the doctor, with a weary shake of his head, declared it. Adana was gone. The news spread through town like harmattan fire. At the funeral, crowds filled the church, women tying black wrappers, men bowing their heads solemnly. The choir sang hymns that made the air thick with grief. Okori wept openly, clutching his wife's coffin. "Adana, my jewel, how can I live without you?" Ngozi stood a few steps behind, her face arranged into the perfect mask of sorrow. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, but her tears were forced, squeezed from a heart that felt not grief but triumph. In her mind, she whispered, "At last. The place is mine." Time softened the raw edges of mourning, as it always does. Months passed, and life in Umuahia resumed its rhythm. But in the Okori household, things had changed. Neighbors noticed how often Ngozi was seen beside Okori now. At first, it seemed innocent, a trusted maid helping a grieving man. She brought him meals, managed household accounts, even accompanied him to church. Slowly, whispers began. "That girl is too close. It's not proper." But no one confronted him directly. One evening, barely a year after Adana's death, Okori announced quietly to his family that he intended to remarry. And the bride? Ngozi. The compound buzzed with shock. Some relatives objected, calling it disrespectful to Adana's memory. Others shrugged, reasoning that a man needed companionship. Okori, weary of arguing, went ahead with his decision. The wedding was simple, far smaller than his first. Yet Ngozi, dressed in white lace, walked with her head high. She was no longer the house girl. She was Madame Okori. The dream she had nursed in secret had finally come true. But dreams, when built on poison, carry a bitter taste. At first, she relished her new life. She moved into the master bedroom, wore Adana's jewelry, and drove in the Lexus that once carried her mistress. In the market, women who had once ignored her now greeted her with respect. She smiled sweetly, hiding the satisfaction swelling inside. But whispers trailed her like shadows. Some neighbors refused to greet her. Women muttered behind her back. In church, she noticed how the priest's prayers lingered on words like truth and judgment. Even in the house, things felt unsettled. Okori was not the same man he had been with Adana. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He smiled less, laughed rarely. At night, he sometimes sat alone in the living room, staring into space. One night, she touched his shoulder gently. "My husband, what troubles you?" He shook his head. "I still dream of her. I still hear her voice." Ngozi's stomach tightened. She forced a smile. "Time will heal, my love." But she, too, began to dream. At first, it was fleeting, Adana's face in a crowd, her laughter echoing in the kitchen. But soon the dreams turned sharper, Adana standing at the foot of the bed, eyes hollow, voice whispering, "Ngozi, why?" She woke sweating, heart racing. Business troubles followed. Okori's once thriving shops faltered. Goods delayed at the port, trusted partners betrayed him, debts mounted. He grew frustrated, snapping easily. "Nothing works anymore," he muttered often. Neighbors began to gossip. "Since Adana died, things have not been the same." Some hinted at a curse. Others whispered darker suspicions, that Ngozi's hands were not clean. One afternoon, an old woman selling vegetables at the market stopped Ngozi. Her eyes were sharp, her voice low. "Child, the ground remembers blood. What is buried will rise." Ngozi froze, unable to respond. She hurried away, but the words clung to her like a stain. The unraveling came quietly. It began when Kolu, the pharmacist, was arrested for selling expired drugs. In the investigation, he mentioned in passing how one house girl used to ask many odd questions about medicines. The police grew curious. They traced his words back to the Okori household. When detectives visited, Ngozi tried to stay calm. She offered them tea, smiled politely. But when they questioned her about her relationship with Kolu, her voice trembled. She contradicted herself, gave details she shouldn't have known. Okori watched silently, confusion etched on his face. Finally, the detectives requested an autopsy report from Adana's death, something the family had avoided out of respect. The findings shocked everyone, traces of toxic substances in her organs. The truth was out. The day of Ngozi's arrest, the compound swelled with neighbors. Some gasped, others muttered, "We suspected." Women shook their heads, clucking their tongues. Okori stood motionless as officers led her away in handcuffs. She cried, begging him, "My husband, please. I did it for us." But his eyes were empty. In the cell, Ngozi sat on the cold floor, her head in her hands. For the first time, the enormity of what she had done crashed upon her. She had destroyed a good woman, betrayed a kind man, poisoned not just a life but an entire household. And for what? A dream that crumbled the moment it was realized. Her whispers of envy had turned into a scream of ruin. Life moved on in Umuahia, as it always did. Markets opened, buses honked, children laughed. But the story of the maid who poisoned her mistress lingered, retold in whispers at salons, in sermons at church, in warnings from mothers to daughters. And the moral was always the same. Envy devours the heart faster than poison devours the body.